She called me the night my daughter stopped returning her own calls, and something in her voice told me this wasn't the kind of trouble that fixes itself. My daughter, Irene, had been married for 3 years to a man named Cole Whitfield. I'd had a bad feeling about him from the first Sunday dinner he came to, the way he cut Irene off mid-sentence and smiled at me while doing it, like he was daring me to say something. I didn't. That's the thing I'll carry for the rest of my life. I didn't say a word. I'm 64 years old. I spent 31 years driving a city bus in Memphis, Tennessee. I raised 2 kids on that salary after my wife Elaine passed from breast cancer when Irene was 11 and my son Ray was 16. I know what hard looks like. I know what tired looks like. I know what tired looks like. What I didn't recognize until it was almost too late was what broken looks like when someone you love is working very hard to hide it from you. Before I go any further, tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I want to know who's out there. The call came from my granddaughter, Sophie. She was 7 years old and she wasn't supposed to have a phone, but Irene had taped an old flip phone to the back of Sophie's dresser drawer with a piece of masking tape and one instruction. Call Grandpa if you're ever scared and Mama can't help you. Sophie called at 2017 in the morning. I was in my recliner because my back had been giving me trouble and the bed wasn't doing me any favors. I answered on the second ring. There was breathing on the other end, small and careful, like a child trying not to make sound. Sophie, I said. Grandpa, just the one word, that was enough. I was in my truck in 4 minutes. Memphis to their house in Cordova was 40 minutes on a good night. I made it in 32. I need to back up because none of this makes sense without the rest of it. Cole Whitfield had a mother named Judith and a brother named Aaron. The 3 of them operated like a unit, like a machine with moving parts that all ran in the same direction. Judith had money, real money, old Memphis family money, and she made sure Cole knew it and Cole's wife knew it and anyone who came within 10 feet of her knew it. She was the kind of woman who gave gifts that felt like threats. She bought Sophie a bedroom set without asking Irene, had it delivered on a Tuesday, and told Irene she could put the old furniture in storage or donate it, whichever she preferred, as if it was a kindness. Aaron was worse in a different way. He was Cole's younger brother by 5 years, 29, soft around the middle, with the particular cruelty of a man who has never had to face a consequence. He lived in Judith's pool house and spent most of his time at Cole and Irene's place, just drifting in and out like he owned it, eating their food, leaving his shoes in the hallway, saying things to Irene that were technically not insults but weren't anything else either. I didn't know how bad it was. Irene didn't tell me. She would call me on Sunday afternoons when Cole was out, and she'd sound almost fine. A little tired, a little quiet, and when I asked how things were, she'd say, "You know how it is, Dad. Busy week." I believed her because I wanted to, because the alternative was something I didn't know how to hold. What I found out later from Irene herself, piece by piece, was this. Cole had been hitting her for almost 2 years. Not constantly. It wasn't every day. It was unpredictable, which was somehow worse, because the waiting was its own kind of violence. He never hit her face. He was precise about that. He'd shove her into door frames, grab her arms hard enough to leave handprints, once pushed her down the back porch steps and then helped her up and told her to be more careful. Sophie had seen things. Sophie had heard things. A 7-year-old shouldn't have to tape a phone to the back of her dresser drawer, but she did, and she used it. When I pulled up to the house that night, every light on the first floor was on. I could see Cole's truck in the driveway. I sat in my own truck for 30 seconds with my hands on the wheel, and I made a decision about the kind of man I was going to be for the rest of whatever time I had left. I knocked. Cole answered the door in a t-shirt and jeans holding a beer, and he looked at me the way he always did. Not surprised exactly, more like inconvenienced. "Eugene," he said. "Not Dad. Never that. Just my name like I was a neighbor who had shown up at an odd hour." "I'm here to see Irene," I said. "She's asleep." "I'd like to hear that from her." He took a long pull from the bottle and leaned against the door frame. He was 34 years old and he worked in commercial real estate, and he'd never had a man look at him the way I was looking at him right then. I could see him deciding what to do with it. It's late, he said. It is, I agreed. It's 2:30 in the morning and my granddaughter called me, which means something in this house isn't right, so I'm going to ask you one more time to get my daughter. He let me in. I don't know if it was the way I said it or something in my face. Maybe both. He stepped back and I walked through the door. Irene was in the kitchen. She was sitting at the table in her robe with a dish towel pressed to her forearm. She looked up when she heard my boots on the floor, and something happened in her face that I hadn't seen since she was 11 years old, and I had to tell her that her mother wasn't coming home from the hospital. It was the face of someone who has been holding something so heavy for so long that they've forgotten what it feels like to put it down. Dad, she said, and her voice cracked on the one syllable. I pulled out the chair next to her and sat. I didn't look at the dish towel. I looked at her face. I'm here, I said. Cole was in the doorway behind me. She tripped, he said, caught her arm on the cabinet. I kept my eyes on Irene. Sophie appeared in the hallway behind Cole, her hair in braids, clutching a stuffed rabbit. When she saw me, she made a sound I cannot describe and came running. I caught her and held her against my chest, and over her head I looked at my daughter, and Irene nodded once. Just once. And I understood everything. I stayed that night. I slept on their couch with my boots still on, and in the morning, when Cole left for work at 7:15, I sat with Irene and Sophie at the kitchen table and drank coffee and listened to all of it. Everything she'd kept from me for 2 years. She talked for almost an hour, and I didn't say anything, just listened, because that's what she needed first. Then I asked if she had a lawyer. She didn't. I asked if she had a friend she could stay with. She said Judith had made sure over the years to separate her from most of her friends. Little things. A comment here about how that woman didn't seem like a good influence, an event that conflicted every time Irene had plans. The way that kind of control works. Slowly, quietly, until the person being controlled looks around one day and realizes the circle has gotten very small. Then you're coming to me, I said. He'll find us. Let him, I said. Let him come find you at his father-in-law's house and explain to me personally what his plan is. She almost laughed. It wasn't funny, but it almost was. That's grief sometimes. That's how it comes out when there's nowhere else for it to go. What happened over the next 3 weeks is the part of the story that I'm not entirely proud of, and I'll tell it honestly, because that's the only way it's worth telling. Irene didn't leave right away. She wasn't ready. And I have had to make peace with the fact that I could not make her ready. I could only be there when she was. So, I started coming by the house. Regularly. With reasons. A book I said I lent them and needed back. Groceries I said I had too much of. A broken porch light I'd noticed driving by. I showed up with a toolbox twice a week, and I fixed things, and I sat in their kitchen and I watched. Judith came by on a Wednesday afternoon while I was there, replacing the weather stripping on the back door. She came in without knocking, the way she always did, calling Cole, honey, and then stalked in the kitchen doorway when she saw me on my knees by the door with a utility knife. She recovered fast. Judith was always fast. Eugene, I didn't know you were coming by. Irene mentioned the door was drafty, I said, not looking up. Figured I'd take a look. That's fairly kind. She set her bag down on the counter, like she owned the counter. Though I keep telling Cole they should just call someone, a professional. You shouldn't have to trouble yourself. I pressed the new stripping into place with my thumb. No trouble, I said. This is what family does. There was a pause, just long enough for both of us to understand what I meant. She didn't stay long that day. Aaron was a different problem. He showed up 2 days later, a Thursday around dinner time, and let himself in with his own key. Something I hadn't known about. I was at the kitchen table with Sophie, helping her with a second-grade worksheet about animals, when the door opened and this man I barely knew walked through it like he lived there. He stopped when he saw me. "Oh," he said, "you're here." "I am," I said. He went to the refrigerator, opened it, stood there for a moment looking at it like a man reading a menu. Then he looked at Sophie. "Hey, Squirt, you eat all the good stuff again." Sophie didn't say anything. She moved her worksheet closer to her side of the table and kept writing. She was 7 years old and she had already learned to make herself smaller when Aaron came into her room. My jaw tightened. I kept my face easy. "Aaron," I said, "do you have a key to this house?" He took out a container of leftover pasta. "Yeah, Cole gave it to me." "Does Irene know?" He shrugged. "Unsure she doesn't mind." I looked at him for a long moment. He was the kind of young man who has spent his entire life having people decide they don't want the trouble of pushing back. I could see exactly how he'd gotten this way, this comfortable, this careless, this sure that the world would arrange itself around him. "After today," I said, "I'd ask you to knock first. This is Irene's home." He stared at me, then he laughed, but it wasn't a comfortable laugh. "Man," he said, "you're something else." "I've been told," I said, and went back to Sophie's worksheet. He left without eating the pasta. The moment that changed everything came on a Sunday. Irene had told me that Judith hosted a family lunch every other Sunday, and that attendance was not optional. Cole's words, not optional. Irene went because refusing had consequences she'd learned to avoid. But this particular Sunday, Sophie woke up with a fever. Not serious, under 1.2. The kind of fever that meant a child needed soup and rest, and her mother. Irene called Cole, who was already at Judith's, and told him Sophie was sick and she was staying home. Cole came back to the house at noon. I know because Irene called me at 12,006 and all I could hear before the line went quiet was Cole's voice, loud and tight, saying, "You embarrassed me in front of my whole family." I was 20 minutes away. I drove. When I got there, I could hear him through the front door. I knocked once and then opened it myself. Irene had given me a key 2 weeks earlier, and I walked in to find Cole standing in the hallway outside Sophie's bedroom with his fist raised, and Irene with her back against the wall between him and that door. Sophie was sick in her bed on the other side of that door, and her mother was standing in front of it. Cole turned when he heard me come in. His arm came down slowly, his face cycled through several things. Then it settled on a kind of bravado that I recognized as the last shelter of a man who realizes he's been caught. "Eugene," he said, "this is between me and my wife." I walked down the hallway until I was close enough that he had to look up slightly to hold my eyes. I'm not a big man. I'm 64 and I have a bad back and a knee that predicts rain better than any weather app. But I have been on this earth a long time, and something about that changes the way you take up space. "Step back," I said. He didn't for about 4 seconds, then he did. I looked at Irene. She had her hand flat against the door. "Go check on Sophie," I said. She went inside and pulled the door almost closed behind her. I looked at Cole. "I'm her father," I said. "I've been quiet for too long. That ends today." What happened next didn't involve anything I'm going to describe in detail, because the details don't matter. What matters is this. A man who has spent years doing something in the dark generally knows, on some level, that he has been doing it in the dark for a reason. When that dark goes away, most of that certainty goes with it. Cole Whitfield was not a brave man. He had never needed to be. Bravery requires the possibility of real consequence, and real consequence had never found him before. It found him that afternoon. Irene and Sophie came to my house that evening with 2 suitcases and a cardboard box. Sophie brought the stuffed rabbit. She also brought a shoebox. She told me very seriously, contained her most important items, and when I asked what was in it, she said, 3 rocks, my library card, and Mama's picture from before. I didn't ask which picture. I just carried the box inside. Now, here is the part people don't tell you about in these stories, because it doesn't fit neatly into the version where justice is clean and immediate. Judith called me the next morning at 8 a.m. She had gotten my number from Cole. Her voice was the kind of calm that is actually a threat wearing a suit. "Eugene," she said, "I think we're in danger of making this situation much worse than it needs to be. Cole has some issues he's working through. This is a family matter." "It is," I said, "my family." A pause. "Irene has a very comfortable life. I'd hate to see her make decisions she'll regret." "Judith," I said, "I want you to think very carefully about that sentence and whether you'd like to say it again." She did not say it again. Aaron showed up at my house 2 days later. I'll give him this. He knocked. He stood on my front porch in a hoodie with his hands in the front pocket, and he looked for the first time like what he actually was, a young man who had grown up inside a family that mistook cruelty for strength and had never learned the difference. "I need to talk to you," he said. "All right," I said. "Talk." "Cole's not a bad person," he started. "He just—" "Stop," I said. "I'm going to tell you something, and I want you to hear it. A man who raises his hand to his wife is not a complicated person who makes mistakes. He's a man who has decided that his comfort is worth more than another person's safety. There's no version of that sentence where he's not a bad person." Aaron stood there for a moment. His jaw worked like he was chewing something. "Judith says—" "I know what Judith says," I told him. "Judith has spent 30 years telling everyone in your family what things are allowed to mean. I'm not in your family." He left without whatever he'd come for. The divorce took 8 months. I won't walk through all of it because most of it was paperwork and waiting and the particular misery of watching your child navigate a legal system that moves on its own schedule while she's trying to rebuild a life. What I will say is this: Irene's attorney was a woman named Patricia who had been doing family law in Shelby County for 22 years, and she was exactly the kind of person you want in your corner when the other side has money. Judith hired Cole, a lawyer who wore French cuffs and drove a Porsche Cayenne. Patricia wore sensible shoes and knew every judge on the docket by their first name and whether they'd had a hard morning. We won. Not just the divorce. Irene got primary custody of Sophie. She got the house because it had been purchased with a down payment that came partially from Elaine's life insurance. Money I had given Irene years before. Money that was documented. Money that Judith's French-cuffed attorney tried to argue was a gift to the marriage, and Patricia calmly explained with the relevant receipts and a wire transfer record was not. Cole got supervised visitation and an anger management requirement. The judge was not impressed with him. Judith and Aaron did not attend the final hearing, which surprised me. I had expected them to be there, if only to perform something, but they weren't. I've thought about that since. I think they knew it was over and couldn't find a way to show up to an ending they hadn't written. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, Irene and Sophie were still at my house. We'd converted the back bedroom, the one that had been Ray's, and Sophie had decorated it herself with a butterfly poster and approximately 400 stickers she got from a craft store. She was doing well in school. She had a best friend named Lily, from her class not anyone connected to the Whitfields, and they were inseparable in the particular way of second-grade girls who have decided they are sisters. One evening, I was on the porch with a glass of sweet tea, watching the light go low over the yard, and Sophie came and sat on the step below me with her stuffed rabbit in her lap. "Grandpa," she said. "Yeah, baby. Is Cole always going to be my dad?" I looked at her. She was watching a firefly at the edge of the yard. 7 years old, going on 40. "He'll always be your biological father," I said, picking my words slowly. "But being a dad is about what a person does every day. Who shows up? Who sits on this step with you?" She thought about that. "You show up," she said. "I always will," I said. She leaned her head against my knee and watched the firefly until it went dark. There are things I wish I had done differently. I wish I had spoken up at that first Sunday dinner 3 years ago, when Cole cut Irene off mid-sentence and smiled at me like it was a game. I wish I had asked harder questions in those Sunday afternoon phone calls when she said, "Busy week," and I said, "Okay." I wish I had not needed a 7-year-old to be braver than me. But here is what I've learned. At 64, with a bad back and a knee that predicts rain and 31 years of Memphis streets behind me, there is no age at which it becomes too late to stand up. There is no version of too old. That means your presence stops mattering. The mistake I made wasn't being old. It was being comfortable. It was telling myself that Irene was grown, that she could handle it, that it wasn't my place. It was always my place. I was just scared of what it would cost. Fathers, grandfathers, anyone listening who has someone in their life they're watching from a safe distance because it seems easier, I'm talking to you. Not to shame you. I know the feeling. I lived inside it for 2 years. I'm talking to you because I came out the other side, and I can tell you, the cost of stepping in is nothing compared to the cost of standing still. Sophie still has the flip phone. She keeps it in the shoebox with the 3 rocks and the library card and the picture of Irene from before. I asked her once why she kept it. "In case I ever need to call you again," she said. "You can always call me," I told her. "Anytime, for any reason." She nodded, satisfied, and put the lid back on the box. That box sits on her dresser now, out in the open, right where she can see it. She doesn't need to tape anything to the back of a drawer anymore. And if you know someone who does, someone whose world has gotten very small, very quiet, very careful, don't wait for the 2 a.m. phone call. Show up before it comes. That's the only advice I have left, and I mean every word of it. I still think about that flip phone taped to the back of Sophie's dresser drawer. A 7-year-old child made a better decision than I had in 2 years. She saw clearly what I've been choosing not to see, and she acted on it without hesitation, in the dark, at 2 in the morning, while the rest of the house held its breath. That kind of quiet courage from someone so small has a way of rearranging everything you thought you understood about yourself. Here's what I'd had to reckon with honestly. Cole didn't become what he was overnight. Judith didn't raise a household built on control in a single season. These things grow in the space that good people leave empty when they decide that staying comfortable is the same as keeping the peace. I left that space empty for 2 years. I told myself Irene was grown. I told myself it wasn't my place. And every Sunday afternoon when she said busy week and I said okay, I handed that space over a little more. Actions have weight. So does inaction. Both of them compound. What finally changed things wasn't strength in the way people usually mean it. It wasn't a confrontation in a hallway, though that happened. It was something quieter first. The decision to stop looking away. To show up with a toolbox on a Wednesday. To sit at a kitchen table and actually listen instead of waiting for a reason not to worry. Doing right by the people you love isn't always a moment. Usually it's a series of small, unglamorous choices made before anything reaches a crisis point. And then there is the matter of being smart about it. When I walked back into that house, I didn't walk in swinging. I walked in watching. I paid attention to what Judith said and how she said it. I paid attention to which door Aaron came through and what key he used. I let Patricia do what Patricia knew how to do, because knowing when to step aside for someone more skilled than you isn't weakness. It's the clearest kind of thinking. The wire transfer record that won Irene her house wasn't my idea. It was just a document I had kept because I'm the kind of man who keeps documents. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply not be careless. But none of it, not the toolbox, not the attorney, not the documents, would have meant anything without the willingness to keep going when it was uncomfortable. 8 months of divorce proceedings is a long time. There were mornings Irene was exhausted and I was exhausted, and the paperwork seemed designed specifically to wear people down until they gave up and accepted something less than what they deserved. We didn't give up. Not because we were fearless. Because we were tired of the alternative. I think about what Sophie said when I asked why she kept the flip phone. In case I ever need to call you again. She wasn't being sentimental. She was being practical. She had learned at 7 years old that the world is unpredictable and that the most important thing is knowing who will answer. Be the person who answers, not just in the crisis, before it. Sure, before the 2 a.m. call. Ask the harder question on the Sunday afternoon when everything seems almost fine. The almost is where it lives. That's where you have to be paying attention.